I'll show you the dark side.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to Star Wars Jedi Outpost. Today is Wednesday, May 11th, and this is the podcast transporting you to a galaxy far, far away. On this special episode, I will be reviewing the latest canon novel, Bloodline, from young adult author Claudia Gray. So Bloodline is the newest canon novel, taking place roughly 6 years before The Force Awakens. The book's main focus is Princess Leia, and the story involved is a political thriller that basically sets up what we saw in The Force Awakens. So unlike Claudia Gray's previous Star Wars book, which was a young adult science fiction romance story, Bloodline is actually completely the opposite. Bloodline basically is a political thriller, very much so in the vein of like a 70s kind of spy movie. Bloodline really shows basically where the galaxy was 6 years prior to The Force Awakens, which was something that a lot of people had questions about. You know, people were wondering, after they saw The Force Awakens, they were saying to themselves, well, where was the state of the galaxy? We know there's the Resistance. We know there's, the First Order. But people had a lot of questions on how the First Order got started. A lot of people had questions on, how the New Republic got started. And this book doesn't tell you exactly how the Republic got started, but it shows you basically the inner workings of the Republic and how they deal with certain issues. And the book gives you definite answers on how we got to the point that we're at from Return of the Jedi to now The Force Awakens. This book very much deals with the inner webbings of the Senate, and it was really interesting to see. They had a lot of kind of tossbacks and remnants from the Old Republic. When I was reading the book, you had, that vision of what the Senate looks like. It's those circular floating platforms, and there's senators from every state, and they're all convening during the senatorial gatherings. And so that's kind of what this book sets up. And, the Senate goes through all these policies. But what makes this book really stand out, and what makes it really interesting, more so than the political system that we saw from the prequel films, is the fact that there's actually a really fascinating story woven into all the political stuff in this book. And primarily, the story concerns itself with Princess Leia, who is at a meeting with a bunch of senators, and she receives a cryptic message that says, "Run." And what ends up happening is a bomb goes off in the Senate, and it leads Princess Leia to kind of do like a murder kind of mystery thing where she's trying to figure out who tried to have her killed and who tried to, sabotage the New Republic. And it leads her on this kind of dark path of discovering the criminal underworld and finding out that there's a band of warriors who basically are, pre-First Order. So the book really is about this political thriller, and it's really interesting right from the start. And it was just a fascinating read. And what really made this book amazing was the fact that it does answer a lot of questions that people had concerning The Force Awakens. So regarding the characters of the book, there were a lot of classic characters in the novel. Of course, Princess Leia is the main one. Han Solo makes a couple appearances here and there. And what we learn about Han and Leia's relationship is that they are still together during this book. So sometime, within the next, 6 years after Bloodline takes place, Ben Solo turns to the dark side. And, we all know what happens after that fateful day comes, and Han and Leia end up separating. But by the time this book starts, and even by the time the book ends, Han and Leia are still together, and Ben is still Ben. He's not Kylo Ren yet, and Ben is training with Luke to become a Jedi. So that's kind of where Han and Leia's relationship is. And it was nice seeing Han in there a little bit. And, Leia was great. And, C-3PO is in the book. No R2-D2. I'm assuming he's off with Luke. And BB-8 is not in the book. And neither is Poe Dameron. I actually was surprised that Poe Dameron was not in the book or even mentioned, because he's kind of like Leia's right-hand guy when it comes to, the Resistance. But anyway, so Poe Dameron is not in the book, but there's another character who is very much like a Poe Dameron, and his name was Joff Seastriker. And I appreciate what Claudia Gray was trying to do with Joff's character. The problem was I found myself not caring at all about his character. I understand he was trying to be like a new character and kind of like a Han Solo or a Poe Dameron type. I just didn't feel any connection to his character. And that goes the same with another character that was kind of like the love interest to Joff, and that was Greer, who was kind of Leia's kind of right-hand girl. And I just didn't feel the chemistry with those two characters, and I found myself actually kind of bored with both of their storylines. I know they were kind of important to Princess Leia, but for me, I just didn't feel any connective tissue with those characters. I didn't feel the romance. I didn't see the spark. And, for myself, I found them to be, kind of just very one-dimensional characters. And so whenever I came to a chapter where it was just Joff and Greer, I kind of breezed through those chapters because I just found myself completely bored with those sections of the book. And I didn't connect with the characters. Some people really liked them. Me personally, I didn't think they were anything special. But there was one character in this book that was a completely new character who I think was the best character in this novel, and I think it would be really, really cool to see him in a future film. You probably won't. But that character was a guy named Ransom Casterfoe. And Ransom Casterfoe was basically Leia's political opposite, but he was also her equal. So basically where we are in Bloodlines is there are two different factions of the government. Much like we have the Democrats and the Republicans, they have the same thing, but they don't call them that. They call them the centrists and the populists. And Leia is a centrist, which my guess is, if you're looking at it in terms of how that relates to our political system, my understanding is a populist is more like a Republican, and a centrist is very much more like a Democrat. But I could be wrong on that. But that's, from what I've read about the book, that's how I interpreted, those two political factions. So anyway, Leia is a populist, while Ransom Casterfoe is a centrist. And what makes his character so unique is in the book, they basically hate each other right away. And the reason why they hate each other is because Casterfoe, when we're introduced to his character and Leia meets him in his office, Casterfoe keeps a collection of Empire relics. So he has like stormtrooper helmets hanging in his office. He has Imperial Guard helmets. He has weapons used by the Empire. And so you get this really like dark and creepy vibe from this guy. And you think this guy is bad news from the start. And that's why Princess Leia doesn't like him. And it's basically why she doesn't trust him either. But what they did with his character, it was something that I didn't expect coming. I thought his character was going down a certain path, but Claudia Gray made the decision to not do that. And instead, he became the most well-rounded and dynamic character in this entire book. And he actually was, in my opinion, he was the best part about this book. He was amazing. The interactions with him and Leia and their growing friendship was really interesting to see. And I just thought the way, she handled his character was beautifully done. And I really applaud Claudia Gray for doing that, because she created essentially a new character that is now one of my favorite characters in the Star Wars universe. I think he's a fascinating character, and I really want to see more of this guy either in a movie or in a standalone book or even a comic book. I think would be really interesting. So keep your eye open for Ransom Casterfo. He's magnificent, and as the book unfolds, you'll see more of how his character becomes more well-rounded, and basically how exposed he becomes and how realistic he is as a character in the Star Wars universe. So going into what I really liked about this book is something that the book touched on that I have actually been wondering for the last, 20 years or so. And it was something that happened when I first saw Return of the Jedi. And the book references that moment, but it's the moment where Luke tells Leia that basically Luke is her brother and that their father is Darth Vader. And Leia is horrified to learn this truth, and she has that quote where she says, "I know, somehow I've always known," which is basically showing you that she has known kind of deep down that Luke and Vader were, her family, and it's the Force basically telling her that. But in the movie, they don't actually ever explore how she feels about the fact that Luke is her brother and that Darth Vader is also her father. And so the book is really, even more so than a political thriller, it's a psychological thriller, because you get to finally see in the first form of media how Leia has dealt with that horrible truth that her father was the most evil man in the galaxy. And there's a lot of flashbacks to the original trilogy, and she says she remembers Vader, his iron fist on her shoulder as, Alderaan blew up in front of her eyes, and she said she can still hear his mechanical breathing, and, she basically, the only person that knows that Darth Vader is Leia's father is Han Solo, but I mean, Leia has not told Ben Solo yet, and actually no one else knows besides Luke. So we finally get to see basically how Leia deals with that truth. And, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a giant plot point in the book where basically other characters find out that Darth Vader is Leia's father, and it causes a lot of repercussions for Leia, and it basically kind of, without spoiling anything, her view and her ranking in the Senate changes drastically, and it actually causes a chain reaction that leads her to not be in the politics anymore, and it also leads into where she is in The Force Awakens, because in The Force Awakens, I think they mention it once, they call her Senator Organa, but they mainly, in Force Awakens, they call her General. And so, at that point in The Force Awakens, I don't even think she's a senator anymore. I think she's stepped down completely and basically is dedicating herself to running the Resistance, which is basically like the same thing as, running the Rebellion. So anyway, that was the most fascinating part of the book to me, was Leia dealing with that, truth that Vader was her father, and seeing how it affects other people. And, she basically, there's a scene in the book where she tells Ben the truth through a hologram. And it was that was such a fascinating part of the book. It was probably my favorite part of the book, because it was a question that I've always had for years and years and years, was how did Leia deal with the fact that, her real father was the most evil man in the galaxy, and, and it was a big question that was answered in this book, and it was the most compelling part of this book for me. So there wasn't a whole lot about the book that I disliked, but I will say that there were a couple chapters involving, Greer and Joff, Sea Striker, that I just didn't really care about their characters. There were some also like lingering plot lines here and there that I think dragged on a little too long. There was a moment where, Leia goes on this mission to find out more about these characters called the Amaxian Warriors. And I actually liked that chapter, but there was parts of the book involving those characters that dragged on a little too much, and I just found myself not really caring that much. I wanted more, more of the politics, the thriller aspects. I wanted more of the psychological thriller that we got. So I feel like the book in some areas was just kind of scatterbrained all over the place, and I wish it was a little more focused with the Darth Vader stuff, and I wanted maybe a little more on. I was hoping for a little bit more with Ben Solo, but I kind of know why they didn't do it is because they're really saving a lot of the Ben Solo stuff for the films, and I don't blame them because that's what most people like seeing as the films rather than the books. But I think they could have even maybe thrown in a little more hints about maybe how Ben started to become Vader obsessed a little bit, or maybe even thrown in a little epilogue at the end of the book that would maybe give us a tease to what we could expect from Star Wars Episode 8. So, I mean, overall, I really, really like this book a lot. It's definitely one of the better Star Wars books in the new canon. It's not quite as good as Claudia Gray's last book, Lost Stars. It didn't hit that nostalgic note for me, and it didn't it wasn't as fast paced as Lost Stars either. But I will say Bloodlines is a really, really good book, and if you are a big fan of Star Wars and you want to find out more about how we got to The Force Awakens in between Jedi and this new era, Bloodline is the book to check out. It really is it's a fascinating read. It answers a lot of questions that you may have had about The Force Awakens. It's a great political thriller, psychological thriller. You got some of the classic characters mixed with a lot of brand new characters. Casterfo was phenomenal. And Leia just as a character is just amazing. And she was so well developed in this book. So I give this book a really high rating, 10 out of 10. It's phenomenal. Go read it. Not quite as good as Lost Stars, but it's right up there as being one of the best Star Wars books that I've ever read. And yeah, go enjoy it and get ready for Episode 8. Anyway, that will do it for this special Jedi Outpost book review. Get Bloodline at your local bookstore and support Claudia Gray. She really is an amazing author who knows how to write really good Star Wars stories, so go check her out. If you like this review, make sure to hit the like button. Also, check out more Star Wars videos on Jedi Outpost, and check out our website, filmschoolhooligans.com, and may the Force be with you.